it's a humbling reminder. We heard from each of you that it just takes one generation to change the trajectory in either direction. And I'm so, so grateful that it's not just your motto, it's your mission of social mobility. And to have the agency to decide what mobility looks like for each person, because it could be exhausting always climbing that ladder. So my hope is that we create the conditions to give every learner the agency to decide what good enough is for them and to feel confident and secure in that decision. So I'm going to share with you some stats, some research, some practical strategies, but I invite you to anchor into the human side and the stories of our panelists this morning, and to use that as a lens to think about what can each of us do differently within the institutions that we operate in. What can all of us do collectively? While at TNTP, a lot of our work has spanned the K-12 space, we are very, very aware, and for that reason, we also work across the lines of higher ed and the workforce, because that connective tissue can no longer be ignored. And we need to think about how we come together and blur those lines for the learners' benefits. And so I invite you to take on that challenge with me. The focus of today is going to be on making the invisible visible. We hear a lot about learning connected to careers, preparation for the workforce, but there is a persistent invisible currency that we need to name, acknowledge, and intentionally design for in our institutions, and that is social capital. So we'll unpack a little bit about what that means, what that looks like in action, and what role we can all play, not just the leadership and institutions, but the learners themselves. I'll share with you a story. There were a group of students around 2005 through 2007, did everything right by the system, get the grades, take the AP classes, apply to college, figure out what you want to do with life. They checked all the boxes. They were interviewed around 2016, 2017. Now these students were valedictorians of their high schools in Boston. One thing that was in common among the subset that got interviewed was they all wanted to go in the medical profession, majority wanting to be doctors. So when they fast forwarded and interviewed them, the Boston Globe did an interview. Guess how many of them realized the career path they wanted to be in? How many of them became doctors? Any guesses? Half, 2%, 1? That's right, 0. 0. I'm gonna read a quote from the Boston Globe itself. Boston students who persist in chasing their medical dreams face daunting odds in a process that favors the affluent. Students whose families can foot the bill for expensive test prep courses, or offer them the freedom to study or take summer enrichment programs without having to work. You guys, for students with dreams of social and economic mobility, academic achievement is only part of the story. You know this, but our commitment together is to figure out how we become more intentional together so that these outliers do not exist. The challenge is real and it's persistent and it's still very loud today. We know that some experts are estimating upwards of 85% of the jobs that will be available in 2030 haven't been invented yet. So we can no longer be asking our students, what do you want to be when you grow up? What career do you want? We're already limiting them by our own questions. Mobility is declining, right? Sometimes we're working in spaces where we know we're making a difference, but we need to figure out what is working, why, and how to scale it together. And the achievement gap is growing. Now, we can't ignore academics. Foundational numeracy and literacy will never go out of style. But there's more to the opportunity equation that we need to be addressing. So how can we better prepare learners to navigate a dynamic world and workforce? What will it take for education to deliver on its promise of economic and social mobility for all. And what experiences and opportunities across sectors will prepare learners to thrive in life, right? So this is the piece we want to solve for, the experiences we need to be creating, the opportunities we need to be opening doors to. At TNTP, we believe that all learners should be equipped to access multiple pathways to academic, economic, and social mobility so they can thrive in life, careers, and our democracy. So a few years back at TNTP, we recognized that beyond the academic gap, there is a persistent opportunity gap that actually sits at the intersection of what you know and who you know. And we are committed to partnering with all institutions to change that trajectory. I'll give you another quick example, and we'll kind of follow Noah's story. And he is actually also highlighted in our report, The Path to Opportunity. But he's another student, a real human. You can find him on LinkedIn, who was generous to give us his story, his time, his feedback. And at that time, he was a senior graduating high school who faced similar challenges as those in the valedictorian project, in that he had ambitions, he did right by the system, got into college, but still wasn't exactly sure how to navigate. And what happens when you decide you want to change careers? Who do you go to? What information do you have access? You don't know what you don't know. And so using Noah as kind of our partner and thought partner, we actually dug in to ask this question: how do learners' life experiences during their academic journey shape their economic and social mobility in adulthood? Taking a step back and understanding that might actually help us figure out how we intervene with real experiences and opportunities in our institutions. In our report, we found that of young people who were experiencing poverty in high school, only 3 in 10 earned a living wage in adulthood. Now, let's be clear, a living wage is a really low bar. That's not our standard. So imagine just how sobering this data point itself is. I want to actually show you some actual numbers. Again, looking at the lowest bar possible that we actually do not want for our children, the likelihood of earning a living wage by age 30. If you're a high school student experiencing poverty, it's about 31%. Now, we can't ignore academics. Academics matter, and that helps. It helps a great deal. But even then, less than 60% of students have the likelihood of achieving a living wage. High school students from middle and upper income families, 63%. So even when we have our students coming from socioeconomic backgrounds that reflect poverty, they do right by the system, right? Still not surpassing those who come from affluent families. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that a strong academic foundation is a necessary and powerful ingredient of mobility, but it's insufficient on its own. Now, the other thing I want to invite this room to think about is what we don't want to do is layer in, add new things. How do we weave in the solutions, the opportunities, the interventions with the academic journey, knowing that we are serving a whole human with whole needs and whole ambitions? A lot of our research has actually inspired the work on TNTP and the practice and the services that we provide. And so I'm going to focus squarely on the middle report, the Paths of Opportunity, because in that research is how we uncovered the factors of mobility, recognizing that in the opportunity equation, academics is a strong predictor, but there's also 4 other predictors that we have been ignoring or assuming would get solved outside of the educational space. But as we know, that is an unfair assumption that every learner will get what they need from their inherited networks, because we all come from different schools of experience. An immigrant family like my own who came here only for education access doesn't know how to fill out a FAFSA, doesn't know who to go ask for an internship, doesn't know that you actually need to have a plan to apply for financial aid, otherwise you're not eligible if you go last minute. I was paying student loans well into my 30s. And that was okay. But it's not doable for everyone. So these are the 5 factors of economic and social mobility that we identified, and you see academic is squarely there. You all have a handout actually at your table to hopefully take that back with you, and it's similar to what I'm sharing here. And so what this has helped us do is be very, very strategic and thoughtful about, 1, naming it, recognizing that we need a strong academic foundation, number 1. And we need to ensure that our learners have tangible opportunities to build social capital, which I'm going to go into depth shortly. We need to make sure that learning is relevant, not just for a particular job, but for learning connected to careers and pathways and navigating the ebbs and flows of the economy, locally and globally. We recognize that personal supports to navigate the financial aid process, to secure an internship, to even manage and juggle the demands of a family are really, really important, can be deal breakers. And community and civic engagement is one of those things that is far too often overlooked. We know how powerful service is. We heard it from our panel. But it's a chance to actually activate the agency and the muscles of communication and explore what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. And sometimes that is as important as recognizing what you don't want to do with your life. What I'd like to do for the rest of this part is actually do a deep dive on social capital. Break down that word into something that feels a little bit more humanistic, a little bit more tangible, a little bit more actionable and relevant to us. So what is social capital? You might see a lot of different definitions. I love data, I love research, and I like definitions, but only because I can now say, okay, well, how do I codify this? Like, what does this mean in practice? So here's a definition that I will share with you. It's an individual's access and ability to mobilize human connections that might help them further their potential and their goals for themselves, their families, and their communities, as those goals emerge and inevitably will shift over time. So I hope you'll notice both the access and the ability to mobilize. In fact, I heard it loud and clear from the panel today, to self-advocate, to be in spaces where you can interact with other people, whether it's student organizations or with mentors. Sometimes we'll hear leaders of schools saying, and probably rightfully so, well, we have so many adults in the school building, our kids know they can turn to them if they need anything. But what we see and hear from our learners is very different. Some don't have the confidence. Some don't have the comfort. Some don't have the trust. And we can't make the assumption that just because adults are in the room, the learner will know how to activate them. And so today's conversation is about how do we bridge that gap. I do want to highlight what the consequences are if we continue to ignore this and not become intentional brokers of social capital as we are of foundational numeracy and math. According to America's Promise Alliance, access to a caring adult is a huge driver of whether a student stays in school, and if you're out, whether you're willing to re-engage. Brookings Institute refer to this term as economic despair. If you are exposed to a high rate of inequality in your community, you're actually less likely to pursue education. That's kind of counterintuitive. You think you might be incentivized or motivated, but what we see generally happen is that that gap is so wide that sometimes young people can't see themselves hopping over and actually getting on that side of the academic journey. It's just too hard to figure out who's going to take care of my siblings. It's too hard to figure out who's going to pay for it. It's too hard to say no to that current job that might be in your backyard through a family member. According to research by Raj Shetty and his colleagues, they also dubbed this term lost Einsteins in regions with low engagement in the innovation economy. What does that mean? That means talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. Talent is not limited by a zip code, but opportunity is. And we make the assumption that it's a reflection of talent, but it's a reflection of lack of access and support. How do we solve for that? Now, what we have learned is cross-class social networks are crucial. The bare minimum, are we exposing ourselves and our learners to diverse networks? Diverse ways of thinking, diverse ways of looking, right? We hear a lot about pluralism, civil discourse, civic engagement. Its ability to carry conversation with those that look and speak differently from you. Do we ourselves have the comfort in doing that so we can create the space for our learners? Now, there's also consequences for our well-being. The US Surgeon General not long ago did remind us of the epidemic of social isolation and loneliness. Here's what's crazy. I have 2 teenagers. And for the longest time, if we looked at the curve of happiness, it actually went up in the teenage years. That was the happiest time for us, high school, early college. I couldn't say no to a party either. No one told me to say no to a party. But that is reversed. There's a lot of reasons for that. We can call it social media, but it's not the only problem. Things like identity development, sense of belonging, agency. Social capital is a fancy word, but it's an activator. It's an umbrella term. We can call it whatever we want, but it allows for one to develop the confidence to reach out to someone, being around people who care and comfort you. So whose problem is this? For the longest time, this was, and this continues to be, done within walls of homes. Parents connecting their children to internships, finding ways to get Kaplan and Princeton tutoring. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just recognizing that not every family, one, has the knowledge base to activate those resources or the connections to know where to find those. So if we're committed to making sure everyone has the opportunity to work to their potential and realize the level of economic and social mobility they want, then institutions have to commit to it, like Clayton State has, as your mission of social mobility. We have to name it. We have to name what the gap is before we can even begin to solve for it. And so we want to widen that umbrella beyond inherited networks, beyond our neighborhoods and zip codes, to the institutions from K-12 to higher ed, and connect those dots. Now, not all types of relationships are the same. This is really, really important for us to know, especially as we're designing and creating opportunities to increase social capital for our learners. The formal terms are strong ties and weak ties, but think about it this way. When something goes really wrong in your personal life, who do you turn to? Name, you don't have to name a person, but like a parent, a best friend, might be a really close coworker, but somebody you really feel comfortable with, somebody you trust. Those are your strong ties, people who provide you care and comfort in a reliable way. But what we found is really interesting is that is usually not where new opportunities and information comes from. I mean, think about your dinner tables, your Thanksgiving tables. After a while, the conversation kind of becomes redundant. We all kind of have shared knowledge, shared information. We've all kind of shared it with each other. What's critical when it comes to economic opportunity and social mobility is the power of weak ties. These are the people that are your LinkedIn connections that maybe you won't talk to for years. But as you're looking at new opportunities or trying to hear about a certain event or share something you've done, this is where you go to the search box and figure out who's local, who's attending a certain conference, who is a former colleague, and you pick that back up. So for new information and resources, we want to make sure that we are cultivating weak ties and not just strong ties. Again, our strong ties are our inherited networks for the most part. So with the goal of social mobility, we want to make sure, are we cultivating weak ties? And I'll talk a little about what that looks like and how we can actually do that. Oh, I do wanted to point out, with the valedictorian project, what they did to solve for that for future generations is they now connected each graduating senior with both a near peer, someone slightly older than them in that profession, and with a mentor, somebody already established in that profession, to help them navigate through that high school to post-secondary to workforce transition. Those are essentially weak ties. It's possible one of them might become a strong tie if they're really connected, but it doesn't have to be. The other piece that I'll get a little technical on, and I promise I'll pull back from after this. A lot of people ask me, well, this is nice, we get it. We're talking about it, we're working on this, it exists. But I strongly believe that if we're not measuring for it, we risk innovating in the dark. And we might even risk doing more harm than good. I think we're very capable of actually using the metrics to drive how we design and how we create these opportunities. And so this illustrates kind of a four-dimensional way to be thinking about social capital. In fact, why it's even important to measure. The very first fundamental one is quantity, just who you know. There's actually real simple ways we can document that. The number of people in a student's network. You can just make a list on a piece of paper. The second one is quality of relationships. How the student experiences that relationship. There was a survey done, I might get the number slightly off, but there was a survey done by the Search Institute that assessed the quality of developmental relationships, how much care and resources were coming from these adults in school buildings. And when the adults responded, it was 85, 86% of adults who said, we provide what our young people need. When those students were surveyed, it was less than half. It was like 45-ish. So how a young person, how a student perceives the relationship probably matters a little bit more than how we think we're showing up. Those of us who are parents, we know that, right? We're like, well, I'm doing everything, but they're like, yep, nope, you're falling short again. So are we in dialogue with them? Have we created a safe space for them to give feedback? That's why measuring quality and designing for quality on the front end makes such a difference. The third one is the structure of networks, the different people that the students know and the people that those people know. That actually really, really matters, because if a student comes to me and says they want to be in the medical profession, well, I'm not in the medical profession, but chances are I know somebody who is, and I can be that broker. The fourth one, and it's weird to say it's my favorite, but it kind of is my favorite, because I think this is where this is the one that's not always intuitive, but I think Kayla, you mentioned it a little bit multiple times. This is the skill piece. This is why I like to think about social capital as both a resource and a skill. Who has not heard of durable skills today? Those soft skills, the skills that actually get you in conversation actually help you with the roles you want: communication, collaboration, teamwork. The ability to go in a room and not know anyone and introduce yourself and have a conversation is a skill. And we need to think about social capital in that way as well. That is a skill, the agency to both activate relationships and maintain them. If we do this right, then our students not only have access to relationships while they're with us, but 5 years from now, they've built a skill on how to maintain those relationships and grow them over time. Can we hold ourselves accountable to that? First, we have to think about social capital as a skill as much as an asset. Now, if we really do this from the front end, building social capital all the way from when a learner enters the education system to the point that they are engaged and evolving in the workforce, and through the lens that we want them to be active citizens of their communities, we want them engaged in careers that are meaningful and impactful to them. The top part shows what building social capital looks like. The bottom part in light blue is what the benefits are, how we can see and measure for social capital building happening well. So even if we just fast forward to like middle school and high school, what does building social capital look like? Exposing them to a diverse range of people, of careers, connections to advisors, coaches, mentors, access to professional networks and support. So that continues into higher ed, ideally through us building the connective tissue together. We're setting our students up so that when they enter Clayton State and other universities, they're actually already coming with an awareness of what social capital building is. They've already started building those skills, and so we're now able to amplify those for them and more tightly connect that to the workforce. Ultimately, students would have access to and the ability to maintain and mobilize these relationships over time. And it does have a huge long-term benefit on their well-being and the ability to expand career options. We don't know what we don't know. And relationships are the gateway that we need to make more visible. There is a website you can go to for these detailed steps on this slide. It's whoyouknow.org. Very intuitive. But one of the things that we've been doing a lot at TNTP is really breaking down what does it look like to intentionally design for social capital like we design for system coherence and instructional coherence? What does it look like to weave this in authentically to the career-connected learning pathways that our young people and learners are already on? And so what this shows is 4 essential steps. It's not this simple, right? But we can break it down cognitively into something that's digestible that we can start with. I would say step 1 and step 4 are non-negotiable. We do not want to go into this making assumptions about what somebody else needs from us. We all have social capital. We all have assets. Our families are our #1 assets. So we do not want to go in making the assumption that someone needs something from us or that there's a hierarchy to who has social capital. So taking stock allows us to first recognize and name who the learner themselves sees as part of their network. Who do they go to for care and comfort? Who do they go to for advice and how to navigate the college journey? What classes to take? And by taking stock, we can now first recognize where can we help them fill those gaps that they themselves have named. The Making Caring Common project at Harvard has a free tool that you can actually use. In fact, I'm going to go here real quick to just map that out. Students can have it within the first day of class to fill it out and give it back to faculty. And we can quickly recognize and come together to figure out what that looks like. There's tools to be able to map out. At an institution level, we can have our leadership sit and say, what adults do we believe we put within reach when our young people enter our institution? Which of those are we designing for as strong ties, and which ones do we intend to be weaker ties? And then when our students are doing that activity in the first week they join us, where do we see the disconnect? This helps us get more targeted, intentional, and recognize their own agency and power and who they trust. Now, depending if we really want to increase the supports for care, comfort, and or number 3, expanding networks to expand opportunities from the professional side, both might be the goal. One might be a more important goal to start with. You can go down path 2 or 3. So the Da Vinci extension, for example, it's this college program that puts learners in these dream teams, where throughout their college journey, they are in a cohort who is there to reciprocate and respond to any needs a person might have about anything. And so that cohort they go together through the 4 years to be able to then figure out who do we need to tap in to solve for whatever the questions are. And then number 4, are we equipping them to mobilize and sustain relationships even when they leave our institution? So CoHop has a really interesting model here where they work with first-generation college students. And they ensure that they have built these skills, and they actually work with the alumni of the institutions and broker those connections more tightly so that as students graduate, they not only become peers to each other, but they can also become near peers to the students who are still in the institution. And so in Atlanta, we have amazing organizations to partner with for institutions of higher education. We have Achieve Atlanta here in the room today, right? We have the Bastas, the Bravens. We have a lot of organization. And I want to give one example of a model. Was trying to find someone that is within the Atlanta ecosystem, but that we can still kind of look at some examples from. And the one that came to mind for me was Braven. What I specifically want to point out about what's interesting here is the measurement side. So they have coaches and cohorts working with students in the college setting, ensuring that they're going into the workforce with the ability to mobilize and activate relationships. And what's interesting about Braven, I'm happy to share this, it's more words than necessary, but what I want to point out is that in their survey, they have multiple time points where they survey the college students they work with, and they explicitly ask about the dimension of quality of relationships. That has been the one multiple dimensions, but they have squarely been focusing on that dimension for, I would say, for at least the last 5-7 years plus. And thinking about how do we improve the quality of relationships as they are perceived by the college student. And the networking self-efficacy, that comes as a prerequisite to the skill building side, and knowing, do they have the confidence and ability to engage in relationships? One sample question is, I have a mentor who encourages my goals and dreams. Right, so you can even take survey items from existing national tools where you can benchmark your own performance. And in Atlanta, with the ecosystem we have, easily we can benchmark with each other and work together to see, because these students are all graduating within the same economy, in the same community. And how do they show up for each other? Again, I do want to put a red flag out there that to the extent possible, we do not want to think of social capital as this add-on, but think about how it weaves into the priorities we already have. And so whether it's improving the academic services and the foundation, whether it's personal supports, whether it's career-connected learning, all of these, there's a place for building relationships as an asset and a skill, knowing that what we're trying to solve for together is this persistent opportunity gap, which comes through, again, who you know and your ability to activate those relationships. I also want to point out that this really is about reciprocity, right? When we think about activating relationships, we should also be thinking about, how do I show up in the room to help someone else? How do I show up as a resource for someone else? And so many of these programs actually now have curriculums where they're teaching young people how to be thinking about this. We do so much mindset work around academics and the confidence. There is mindset work around how we show up in rooms where maybe most people don't look like me or don't have my background. And I get really intimidated really fast. I was also like you, where if someone spoke to me, I would think the whole room went black and there's this big light on me. And my mom would give me the dirtiest look, like, I called you, you need to come up here. And I'd be like, I'm gonna die. Like, I cannot speak. So it takes time, it takes practice, and it takes the ability for people to say you can do it and to mess up about a dozen times, right? So my call to action for this group is, let's break the silos. Let's stop working in isolation and figure out how we come together with the different institutions around the room. We can't ignore K-12, we can't ignore higher ed, and we can't ignore the workforce. We can't keep functioning from the time when high schools were created in World War I because we needed individuals to pass a test to hold a gun. And so that reason for starting high schools, and I made that very superficial, we still have this model of completing schooling for a very specific purpose. But now we want to give our learners choice and voice and agency in navigating the economy. So those false barriers that we created in the past can no longer exist, and we have to break those together. So my questions for you are, where have you seen opportunities for building social capital show up in your own work? In what ways can you directly support your programs or the learners you serve to name and build social capital, both as an asset and a skill? And what barriers do you face at the moment in collecting data on one or more of these dimensions of social capital? The good news is you don't have to do it alone. We have partners in the room who are already designing, thinking about it, being very intentional. Be intentional together, and let's find ways to scale this. Again, I am so privileged to be here and so grateful. Our commitment at TNTP is to measurably end the correlation between circumstances at birth and life outcomes for all learners, so that our zip codes do not predict what opportunities we have access to. And I'm grateful to be in this room because I know we're on the same page with that, and we're all committed to that goal. And so I invite you to reach out to me, to my colleague Laura, Shaniqua. We have several people here today to be in dialogue and partnership with each of you. We want to learn from you. We want to hear what we could be doing better. And so please do not hesitate to email me and say, we would like you to do more of this. And that'll be our charge as well. Again, thank you for your time and your trust. I can.
Okay, pretty good stuff, right? Very good stuff. And you all should be writing those blue books because she asked some very good questions for us to think about. I just asked our wonderful keynote if she would take a couple of questions because my mind is churning with lots of ideas, and I'm sure some of you are thinking about either the research she shared or ideas. So I do want to open it up to you all if you have a couple of questions that we could wrestle with for the next few minutes. And if you raise your hand, we'll bring the microphone to you.
Thank you so much. This has been definitely paradigm shifting for me. As you were talking, one of the things that stuck with me is that we in higher ed have always talked about networking. Let's put people in a room and let them meet industry partners. How do you encourage us to expand what that means so that when the panel was talking, I thought the students did a very good job of saying the faculty were there, very supportive of them. How do we help our learners understand that their social network or the capital is not just someone who has a degree already or someone who's in the profession already, but that how do we teach them to see value in a multitude of relationships?
So I'm learning alongside you. And in fact, I was invited many years ago to actually speak to a cohort of college students. And I learned a lot from them as well. And we kind of came up with some processes that I'll share with you. I think the very first thing is, just like we've named this thing, this invisible currency with each other in the room, is starting with naming it. Like I said, there is actual curriculum on building social capital that's being used by many nonprofits today. It could be a couple of sessions during orientation freshman year, where we give young people both the awareness and some tools to be very intentional about how to show up for other people, starting with their peers. One of the other things we talked about was, and I actually use this myself now, being kind of an introvert myself, I never go to a conference without first reading up on who's going to be there and telling myself, you are going to go up to 3 people you do not know. And you're going to introduce yourself and you're going to find something in common. And then I come back and I have one of my colleagues actually hold me accountable to say, who were those 3 people? And what are you going to now do together? And then I connect with them on LinkedIn. It takes effort. It's a lot easier to go to your hotel room and order room service when you have 3 kids at home and not socialize at night. But once I started doing that, and I actually learned it from a cohort of college students that I talked to many, many years ago, it's been so productive and so fulfilling. And that's how I've practiced some of my speaking skills too, is just letting myself do that in smaller spaces. So I think having that pre-conversation with them, bringing them into spaces, having them name what they want to achieve in that, and then having those debriefs. It doesn't have to be every time, but if it's woven into the curriculum and the experience, then it becomes a lot more easier. And you could even put in some questions and surveys to assess kind of where their mindset is. Are they building the confidence? Are they building the comfort? And get that feedback from them.
Thank you for your speech. So, as a proud alumna of Clayton State, I know that we're ahead of the game on social mobility, but there are many organizations represented in the room, and other alumni bases are sometimes resistant to the change of the university as it becomes more diverse and more first gens are a part of the student body. How do the individuals at the organization or administration in the university help alumni at some of these other organizations understand that the student body has changed? So in the ways that students want to connect around mentorship and those opportunities look different than it may have looked back in my day.
So is your question about how to help alumni from other institutions?
Kinda, because I work at another institution.
But keep in mind, she's a proud Clayton State University alumni, but yes, we're willing to share our wisdom with you.
I think I heard that. You know, there's a lot of power in convenings and coming together. And so with the work I do at TNTP, my first instinct is to say, come together to the table and identify what is it that's holding them back with the other institutions, and understand what is working in situations. Where are the bright spots? I love to follow the bright spots in data versus the things that aren't working, because that's how we can peel back and figure out what is it about that environment where those alumni are coming back so actively. Because there is an element of reciprocity. It's not just taking, but it's giving. So how do we create that culture of giving with the alumni, probably before they become alumni? My other thought is that we do have another crisis in that the value of college is being heavily questioned today. Not just the financial ROI, but the need for it to get the jobs that young people want today. And so there is a signal there that learners want something from their institutions of higher education that they don't collectively feel they are getting, and it's more than an academic education. And so how do we cultivate that? How do we make that visible? How do we share that out loud through our connective tissue and rebuild that trust with the generations coming and going, that there is a value of the institutions, the academic value, but the social capital value, the connection to the workforce. what is our value add? And I think that's what we need to get in front of to be able to maintain the power of the alumni that many other organizations have.
We're going to take two more questions.
This conversation has been brilliant. This is one of the best talks I've ever heard, and I really appreciate the focus on social capital. One of the things, to be fully transparent, a lot of times I often question social mobility, particularly at a university like this. So with that being said, how do you, so early on, you talked about the systemic things that happen with young people from, impoverished backgrounds. What advice would you give to educators to convey to the students those systemic barriers, but then also give them the tools that they need, the agency that they need in order to excel in a society like the United States? Does that make sense? Yeah.
I actually wish we had time to give answers together because I am not the brightest in the room, and I know people are thinking about solving for this and are already working on this. So I'll give you my initial instinct, but I recognize that a lot of you have valuable things to say to this question. I honestly really hesitate to articulate this in any way that suggests that this needs to sit squarely on the educator's shoulders. I think for many students who maybe are, I'll take the first generation example because that's my lived experience, is my trajectory was a result of educators and my faith community and neighborhood and leadership in institutions. And I know that for Clayton State, nurturing that connective tissue across institutions is really, really important. And with social capital building, I think educators have a role. I think the role of educators is to, one, be aware that we all come from different backgrounds and that what is available in one person's home is not available in another person's home. The piece we did not talk about at all, that could be its own conversation, is the power of technology to actually humanize and supplement the connections that educators are trying to make. And I would definitely love to go into a conversation around that because I think that is a way to both maintain the role of the human element of the educator and ensure that they have the now AI literacy to supplement what they are doing in a thoughtful way, where often we've seen educators use AI and technology tools to deliver more of the fundamental learning so that they can do more of that bridge building and connection work. And so there's a lot of work right now happening in that, even with our organization, that we are working with educators on. But I think that helps us both recognize the limitations of what one person can do, but also invites them to be part of the solution.
Anyone have a burning question? Just so you know, this side is winning. You all are very quiet. So I want to embrace my quieter friends over here if you have anything. If not, we'll declare a winner. We have declared a winner. Thank you very much for sharing your wonderful information with us. And a couple of things, we can keep our program running. I would like to have our students and our keynote speaker, if you can just huddle up to the front. We are going to take a short break so you can check your email, do a stretch, there's water in the back, restroom, and then we will be back here starting at 11:15. But before we go, I wanted to take one opportunity. This planning committee, we all formed last year as a team and just kind of brainstormed, what can we do with social mobility? We want to do this summit. What do you all think? And one of my favorite things at Clayton State is this group, because we meet when we get together and talk about social mobility and what we can do, The ideas are amazing. And I do want to take an opportunity right now just to introduce you to our team. So if you do have questions or ideas or suggestions, make sure you tell them, because they are the minds behind today, and they were the minds behind